Okay, so as many of you know, I'm still going through the Babylonian Talmud. And just finding little things I find interesting here and there. And I've come to this realization as I wrestled with it in my mind. Um, just because I didn't feel comfortable, going through the Babylonian Talmud, but I've decided, I've already started to take this stuff serious. If I'm really living in the daughter of Babylon, take this stuff serious, right? I didn't realize though that there was law codes by this man right here, Hammurabi. I don't hear him mentioned much, in the quote unquote black conscious communities. I don't hear him mentioned much at all, to be honest. But he seems to be of some importance. Because Yale, and this is where Vincent showed me, right? When he showed me the Avalon project and all these treaties and stuff like that are on the Yale website, right? Well, this guy, his law codes from back then made it into the Avalon projects, right? This is what blew my mind as I started to look into him even more. Hammurabi here. The codes he came up with, they sound eerie familiar to some of the codes that they're trying to use on us today. And I put a lot of stock in that. Remember the whole ticket that was dropped? And I remember I told you I was watching it, and one gentleman, I can't remember his name. I left this link in the description box, but he emphasized, you pick one word. He was told by a judge in Mississippi, you pick one word and you attack that one word, right, in their codes. And you give 3 definitions for it and 3 ways of explaining it, and so on and so forth. And he showed the word shall, right? Because if you're the living, breathing man, only another man can tell you what to do, but only you, the other man, can respond to it. Meaning no corporation, nothing else, no animal, no tree, nothing else can tell the living, breathing man what to do but another man. Is the way he was explaining it, right? And when he says you attack that word shall, because it's going to be in all their law codes, right? You shall come to a complete stop. You shall, not smoke or produce, marijuana. Shall. Like the whole speeding ticket, or not speeding ticket, but the lane violation or failure to obey electronic device. It was right there. Pulled it up. It said, shall make a right turn only. But it was shall. And shall is future tense. So the argument is in sometime in the future, I shall do it. But it doesn't specify when. And there's your loophole. So I want to play some of these law codes of Hammurabi. But I want to show you something real quick. Because I was watching, I can't remember the name of the Moorish woman. She goes over the IRS codes, liens, and stuff like that. But she does a lot of redemption stuff. Tribal redemption, anything with redemption. She always makes a mention to read or play the videos to show this view on how to redeem yourself. So let me get to that. And wait a minute. Isn't this the Moabite god here? See, who is he worshipped by? Charles, Kit to the truth. I almost thought this was a god that the Moabites also worshipped. Well, this is going to get us off topic. We'll go. Now listen to this. This is from Yale on the Hammurabi law codes.
Debt was secured on the person of the debtor. Distraint on a debtor's corn was forbidden by the code. Not only must the creditor give it back, but his illegal action forfeited his claim. An unwarranted seizure for debt was fined, as was the distraint of a working ox. The debtor being violated for debt could be nominated as emancipium or hostage to work off the debt. His wife, a child, or a slave. The creditor could only hold the wife or child 3 years as emancipium. If the emancipium died a natural death while in the creditor's possession, no claim could lie against the latter. But if he was the cause of death by cruelty, he had to give a son for his son, or pay for a slave. He could sell a slave hostage, unless she was a slave girl who had borne her master children. She was to be redeemed by her owner.
Any of this sound familiar?
The god of a city was the original owner of its land, which encircled it with an inner ring of irrigable arable land and an outer fringe of pasture. And its citizens were his tenants. The god and his vice-regent, the king, had long ceased to disturb tenancy, and were content with fixed dues in naturalia, stock, money or service. One of the earliest monuments records the purchase by a king of a large estate for his son, paying a fair market price and adding a handsome honorarium to many owners in costly garments, plates, and precious articles of furniture. The code recognizes complete private ownership in land, but apparently extends the right to hold land to votaries, merchants, and resident aliens. But all land was sold subject to its fixed charges. The king, however, could free land from these charges by charter, which was a frequent way of rewarding those who deserved well of the state. It is from these charters that we learn nearly all of the obligations that lay upon land.
So did you hear that? This is where they're learning about the charges that are being laid upon land.
Upon land, the state demanded men for the army and the corvée as well as dues in kind. A definite area was bound to find a bowman together with his linked pikemen who bore the shield for both and to furnish them with supplies for the campaign. This area was termed a bow as early as the 8th century BC, but the usage was much earlier. Later, a horseman was due from certain areas. A man was only bound to serve so many, 6 times. But the land had to find a man annually. The service was usually discharged by slaves and serfs. But the amateur and perhaps the musketeer went to war. The foes were grouped in tens and hundreds. The corvée was less regular. The letters of Hammurabi often deal with claims to exemption. Religious officials and lovers in charge of flocks were exempt. Special liabilities lay upon riparian owners to repair canals, bridges, quays, and sea. The state claimed certain proportions of all crops, stock, and sea. The nation's messengers could commandeer any subject's property.
That sounds eerily familiar to what goes on today. Those that are exempt from going to war and being able to take someone's property.
It has its own octroi duties, customs, ferry dues, highway and water rates. The king had long ceased to be, if he ever was, the owner of the land. He has his own royal estates, his private property and dues from all his subjects. The higher officials had an endowments and official residences. The code regulates the feudal position of certain classes. They held an estate from the king consisting of a house, garden, field, stock, and a salary. On condition of personal service on the king's errand, they could not delegate the service to the pain of death. When ordered abroad, they could nominate a son, if capable, to hold the benefice and carry on the duty. If there was no son, the state put in a locum tenens, but granted 1/3 to the wife to maintain herself and children. The benefice was inalienable, could not be sold, pledged, exchanged, sublet, devised, or diminished. Other land was held by the state for rent. Ancestral estate was strictly tied to the family, if I holder.
See, that's what I want to get to. That's what I want.
ancestral estate was strictly tied to the family. If a holder would sell, the family had the right of redemption, and there seems to be no time limit to its exercise.
Now imagine that. Because I'm wondering, I'm in the Daughter of Babylon, if that exists here, right? To get back family property that's been sold once you prove that you aren't the African, right? Or you claim that you aren't the African, you prove that you are the indigenous ones, right? And that the land that your family members sold behind your back, as the story goes with my mom and her side of the family, then you can get it back. Not that I want this land, I want to get out of here, because I feel this place is about to get even worse than what it is with nanobots and all kinds of stuff.
For the elders, the merchant shall not object, he shall receive it. Comments. This is not the place to write a commentary on the code, but there are a few necessary cautions. One of the first is that most clauses are permissive rather than positive. The verb shall is not an imperative, but a future. Doubtless in case of heinous crimes the death penalty had to be inflicted. But there was always a trial, and proof was demanded on oath. In many cases the shall is only permissive, as when the code says a widow shall marry again. There is no proof that the jury decided only facts and found the prisoner guilty or not, leaving the judge no option but to inflict the extreme penalty. The judge, on the contrary, seems to have had much legislative power. When this view is taken, the code appears no more severe than those of the Middle Ages, or even of recent times, when a man was hanged for sheep stealing. There are many humanitarian clauses and much protection is given the weak and the helpless. One of the best proofs of its inherent excellence is that it helped to build up an empire, which lasted many centuries and was regarded with reverence almost to the end. The prologue and epilogue to the Code of Hammurabi. The prologue and epilogue of the code are very difficult to translate. Often the phrases are simply stock expressions which occur in most of the royal inscriptions. The meanings of many of these have degenerated to mere titles of courtesy and their original significance is obscure. But early translators found no difficulty in guessing the most complimentary things to say, and more recent scholars in their efforts to be exact become grotesque. When an ancient king called himself a rabid buffalo, it doubtless gave him satisfaction, but it would be very rude for us to do so. On the other hand, it is very tiresome to an English reader to read a sentence of 300 lines in length before coming to a principal verb. Such a sentence, a string of epithets and participles, is here broken up into short clauses and the participles turned into finite verbs. This is done, not because the translator is entirely ignorant of grammar, but in pity for the reader. This further necessitates turns, or what is just as bad, words which invariably occur in the same context. If a king calls himself by some strange honorific title, it is no assistance to understanding the meaning of it that a score of successors should do the same. Of many words, all we can conjecture is that the king was honored by them. There is nothing to indicate what they really meant. In some cases mighty is as likely to be correct as wise. There is no reason why we should prefer either rendering. Both can hardly be right, neither may really be. Some king may once have prided himself on being an expert potter, as a modern monarch might on being a photographer. If he called himself on a monument a superb potter, all his successors would keep the title, though they never made a pot in their lives. We have only to peruse the titles of modern monarchs to be sure of the fact. It is, therefore, to be hoped that no one will build any far-reaching theories upon logical deductions from the translations given here or elsewhere of such honorific titles. Prologue to the Code of Hammurabi. When the Most High God, Anu, King of the spirits of heaven, Anunnaki, and Bel, Lord of heaven and earth, who settles the fates of all, allotted to Marduk, the firstborn of Ea, the Lord God of right, a ruler of men, and extolled him among the spirits of earth, Igigi. Then they nominated for Babylon a name above all, they made it renowned in all quarters, and in the midst of it they founded an everlasting sovereignty, whose seat is established like heaven and earth. Then did God, Anu, and Bel call me by name, Hammurabi, the high prince, God-fearing, to exemplify justice in the land, to banish the proud and oppressor, that the great should not despoil the weak, to rise like the sun over the black-headed race, mankind, and illumine the land, to give health to all flesh. Hammurabi there, good shepherd, the choice of Bel, am I, the completer of plenty and abundance, the fulfiller of every purpose. For Nippur, and Urili.
These are the different gods that put this Hammurabi in place to rise over the head of the to rise like the sun over the black-headed races. Psalms 83.